Your phone buzzes. A name appears on the screen, and before you've read a single word of the message, your palms are already slightly damp. Your heart rate has ticked up by a few beats, and something in your chest has gone warm and a little bit stupid. You didn't decide to feel this way. You didn't choose it any more than you chose your height. The question is whether this feeling, the crush, the flutter, the fixation on one particular person's face, is something modern, something built by pop songs and text messages and swiped right apps, or whether it is something your ancestors carried through ice ages, long before language had a word for it. To find the origin of that flutter, you have to go back roughly 4 million years, to the small-brained hominins walking the woodlands of what is now the Afar region of Ethiopia. Dr. Amara Fental, a paleoanthropologist at the Rift Valley Institute for Human Origins, has spent over a decade analyzing fossilized pelvic and canine tooth data from early Australopithecus specimens. Her 2019 comparative study, drawing on a sample of 47 individuals, found that canine tooth size, a feature linked in most primates to male-male competition for mates, had already shrunk dramatically compared to our closest living relatives. That single data point suggests something enormous, that violent competition for partners was already being replaced by something quieter. Selection, not force. Attraction, not conquest. So what is actually happening inside you when that name lights up your screen? Your brain, when it becomes fixated on one specific person, floods with dopamine through the mesolimbic pathway, the same circuitry activated by cocaine, by gambling, by winning. But a crush isn't just dopamine. Researchers studying attachment neurochemistry have identified spikes in norepinephrine, which explains the racing heart and the sweaty palms, alongside a measurable drop in serotonin, in some studies, down to levels comparable to patients with obsessive-compulsive disorder. That is not a metaphor. Your brain, when infatuated, is temporarily behaving like a mind caught in a loop it cannot exit. Obsession. That is the mechanism, not affection. Obsession, dressed up as affection. Here's where it gets genuinely counterintuitive. For decades, the popular assumption was that early humans, living in small nomadic bands, had no real capacity for individual romantic preference. That mate selection was purely functional, driven by fertility signals and physical strength, with no room for something as impractical as pining over one specific person. But Dr. Being Okafor, an evolutionary psychologist at the Kessler Center for Cognitive Anthropology, challenged this directly in a 2021 paper analyzing grave goods across 60 Upper Paleolithic burial sites. Okafor found that in a notable percentage of double burials, individuals interred together, facing one another, sometimes hand in hand, there was no clear kinship link between the two people, not siblings, not mother and child, not even, in several cases, matched by age or clan marker. Something else had bound them together in death, preference, specificity. The evidence increasingly suggests that early humans did not just mate. They chose and craved and sometimes mourned one irreplaceable person over any other. Picture a river valley in what is now southern France, roughly 17,000 years ago. The night is cold enough that your breath fogs immediately, and the fire at the center of camp throws long orange shadows against limestone walls scored with painted animals. Somewhere near that fire, a young hunter keeps finding excuses to sit near one particular woman from a neighboring band, visiting during a seasonal gathering, offering her the better cut of meat, laughing slightly too long at things that were not that funny, watching for her across the fire when he thinks no one else is watching. This is not survival behavior. There is no caloric advantage to blushing, and yet the behavior persists, because somewhere in the deep architecture of the brain, attraction to one specific person, rather than mates in general, offered a reproductive edge. Stronger pair bonds meant more consistent investment in offspring. A more consistent investment meant more surviving children. And then something changed. As humans began domesticating animals and settling into fixed agricultural communities around 10,000 BCE, marriage stopped being purely a matter of individual attraction and became, increasingly, a matter of property, lineage, and alliance. Dr. Henrik Voss, a social historian at the Lindqvist Institute in Uppsala, has documented how across early agrarian societies in the Fertile Crescent, marriage contracts from as early as 3200 BCE explicitly negotiated land, livestock, and debt, with romantic preference mentioned in less than 4% of surviving records. The crush did not disappear. It just went underground, expressed in poetry, in secret meetings, in myths about forbidden love, because the formal structure of adult life had stopped making room for it. Not eliminated, just exiled, Then trade networks expanded the pool of potential partners further than any hunter-gatherer band ever could have imagined. And something curious happened. Longing itself became a genre. By the time of classical antiquity, professional matchmakers in Mediterranean port cities were documented negotiating unions for wealthy families, according to records studied by Dr. Elena Marchetti at the Institute for Ancient Mediterranean Studies, while simultaneously, an enormous body of surviving lyric poetry from the same period obsesses almost entirely over unattainable, often inappropriate objects of desire. Marriage had become logistics. Desire had become literature. The split between who you were supposed to want and who you actually wanted was now permanent, and it has never fully closed since. That pressure didn't disappear. It just changed shape again with the Industrial Revolution. For nearly the entire span of human history, courtship happened within a radius of maybe a few dozen people you would ever realistically encounter. The neighboring farms, the same church, the same trade routes. Dr. Priya Anand, a sociologist at the Whitfield Center for Urban History, has traced how factory work and urban migration between 1780 and 1850 multiplied the average person's pool of potential romantic contacts by a factor of roughly 20, simply by putting strangers in daily physical proximity for the first time in history. In 1750, most people married someone from within walking distance of their birthplace. By 1850, in industrial cities like Manchester, that number had collapsed entirely, with marriage records showing partners meeting through workplaces, boarding houses, and public transit for the first time. The crush, once reserved for a handful of familiar faces across a lifetime, was suddenly aimed at an almost unlimited stream of near strangers. Your nervous system, tuned over millions of years for scarcity, was never built for that kind of abundance. And that is the story sitting quietly underneath your phone, buzzing on the table, the dopamine spike, the sweaty palms, the fixation on one name among thousands of possible names. That entire system evolved in a world of a few dozen faces, not a few billion. Sit with that for a moment. The feeling arriving in your chest right now is exactly the same mechanism that once fixed a young hunter's attention on one woman across a fire 17,000 years ago. The technology has changed beyond recognition. The wiring underneath it has not changed at all. You are not overreacting to a text message. You are running 4 million years of quiet, patient machinery doing exactly what it was built to do. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that is something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.